Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. Today is part 2 of my video about the best or my favorite reissues of 2022. There's a bunch of links down below. Make sure you go check those out. There's links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music weekly playlist that we put together, and also the Patreon page. So make sure you go check all that out. Of course, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me the old thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. Like I said in the first video, 2022 was an absolutely incredible year for music. We had a lot of great new music that came out, and we also had a lot of great reissues that came out too. Stuff that hadn't been available for years and years, or stuff that came out that was remixed or remastered or had additional tracks. It's just a great year to be a music fan overall, and so this is part 2 of that. Of that video that I was doing. It just when I started putting this list together, I think I ended up being almost 30 albums altogether. So I trimmed it down to 20. This is going to be the second half of that. None of this is in any kind of order. These are all just kind of randomly thrown about. But the first one, this is kind of falls in the category of something that hadn't been available for a while. Now I think the last reissue of this was back in 2017. There was a couple of different versions that came out this year. But this is Third Eye Blind's self-titled album. This came out September 2nd. And this is an album that, there was a red version that was also available through their website. There was a red version that was released, I think it was 2017 was the last time it had been reissued. But it was like super limited. There was only like 500 of them. So it was pretty expensive if you wanted an older copy of this. It was going to cost you, 100 to 100, I'd say 100 to 150 bucks is probably the average price of what it was going for. So it was great to see this kind of get a wider reissue. Like I said, a bunch of versions available. There's a standard black version. There was a Walmart exclusive. I think there was another big box store that had an exclusive version of it. It might have been Target or somebody else. But like I said, one I've been wanting to add to my collection for a long time. It's great to see it get reissued. The next one on the list, I think it's kind of cheating because it's really 2 albums, but I've long kind of considered it one album. It's Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 by Guns N' Roses. If you listen to, if you want to just like take it for sound quality, these are remastered, but if you listen to the most recent reissue that came out a few years ago, I couldn't really hear a huge difference between the two. I will say the version of November Rain that's on Use Your Illusion 1, I think is a better version than the original version of it, but it's one that I couldn't drop the money for the box set, but I was glad to pick these up. I think Record Store Day this year, there wasn't a huge list of great reissues, at least in my opinion, but there was one I was really looking forward to, and one that I've almost picked up multiple times over the last couple of years, but I'm glad I kind of held off on it for this version. But this is Belladonna by Stevie Nicks. It's a great album. I think it's definitely Stevie Nicks' best work. And for some reason, I picked it up multiple times over the last couple of years and always put it back. Never bought a copy of it. But what makes this one so special is the second disc that's part of this album that has some alternate takes, some demos on there. It's great to kind of listen to that process that Stevie went through to record this album. It's an absolute masterpiece. It's a great album from beginning to end. Just that second disc is just something a little extra to it. The next album came out way back in 1996 and has never been available on vinyl until this year. And it's probably the most bootlegged or one of the most bootlegged albums of the last, 5 or 6 years. That album is Fashion Nugget by Cake. I actually own a bootleg of it. This sounds way better than the bootleg version of it. I bought the bootleg just because it's great to have it on vinyl. I just wanted to have a copy of it. But my long-standing policy is if I have an unofficial pressing of an album, an official pressing comes out, I'm always going to buy a copy of the official pressing because I want to support the artists and support the music. But if you have an unofficial pressing of it and don't have this version of it, this is definitely the version of this album to have. Sounds absolutely incredible. Especially, like I said, the bootleg of it doesn't sound bad. This one sounds far superior to that unofficial pressing. The next one might kind of surprise you a little bit if you've been watching the channel for a while. I'm a big Blink-182 fan. I have been for a long time. They're definitely one of my favorite bands. But Tom DeLonge, he's kind of, I guess I don't want to call it a side project, but I think most of his focus has been with Angels and Airwaves over the last probably 15 years. And they're a band that I never really got into until the last couple of years. I'd say probably the last 2, maybe 2.5 years. I've been getting more into their stuff. And this next album is one I've been wanting for, probably most of that time. Something that's been super hard to find on vinyl. I think the last time it was pressed on vinyl was 2017. I think it was 500 copies that were pressed. Sold out within a couple of minutes. They did the same thing, I want to say it was like 2013, maybe 2014. They did like super small limited runs of this album. It hasn't been widely available since I think 2012 was the last time. You can probably pick up a copy of it pretty easily. That album is Love by Angels and Airwaves. This is actually part 1. Part 2 comes out in January. Fantastic album. It's probably my second, maybe third favorite to Angels and Airwaves album. Definitely behind I Empire. I think I Empire is. I think I put that up with some of the better Blink-182 albums. But Love is a great album from beginning to end. I can't wait for part 2 to come out. I'm sure I'll probably talk about part 2 when I do the same video at the end of next year. But it's a great album. This was actually kind of hard to find also when this came out a couple of weeks ago. But like I said, it's one that, I'm glad to finally have in the collection. Another band I've loved for a long time is Jethro Tull. They actually had 2 big reissues this year. The first one, this is on the list just because it is hands down, I'd say one of the best sounding albums in my record collection. It is the 45 RPM version of Stand Up that was released through Analog Productions. Analog Productions, with everything that's gone on with MoFi over the last year, I think Analog Productions is probably taken over as the number one audiophile label that's out there. And what they did with this album, this is an incredible version of this. I think Steve Wilson did a really good job when he remixed this a couple years back. But this one stands up even over that Steve Wilson mix. This is all cut from the original analog tapes. Sounds incredible. The packaging is great. It says if you go back and actually watch it, I did a video about this reissue a couple of months back, and it looks incredible. It's got the original stand-up that's all hand-cut and hand-glued inside the jacket on this. But when it comes down to just the music, like I said, this is not only a great sounding album for 2022, but it's one of the best sounding ones in my collection. And then part 2 of that is the new 50th anniversary release of Thick as a Brick. This is they took the Steve Wilson remix that came out, I don't remember what it was, a few years back, and this is all cut half-speed mastered, so it sounds great. I think this is probably the definitive version to have of this album. The cool thing is about this is they remade the newspaper. It's kind of hard because I've got it in this jacket and I don't want to take it out, but they perfectly remade the original jacket for the release when it came out 50 years ago. And it's cool. It's this big 13-page, I think it's 13-page, fold-out newspaper. It's got a bunch of interesting stuff to read in it. It's kind of cool to go back and see them kind of meticulously remake that original cover. And that's why I think this is a great reissue for this year. Another great 90s album that has never been available on vinyl until this year. This was released back in April. April 22nd is when this came out. And I think it's been reissued since then. Music on Vinyl does this thing where they'll release a super limited run first, which is generally numbered, but I don't think this is a numbered copy that I've got. And then they'll kind of roll out more copies of it down the line. But the album is Lemon Parade by Tonic. To be completely honest, this is an album that I'd almost forgotten about entirely, even though I do have it on CD. If you could only see was the big track that was on this, probably what made this album popular. But it's an album that if you listen to it from beginning to end, there's so many other great tracks on this album. I think it's kind of a common theme with a lot of those 90s albums. There's so much great music that was coming out in the late 90s. A lot of stuff kind of got lost in the weeds, and I think this is an album that you can definitely put in that category. The next album is probably an album that I've had on my Discogs Want list for the longest time. I've almost picked up an original pressing a couple of times. Original pressings go for a couple $100 normally. And even the most recent reissue, which I think was 2017, goes for well over $100. And I just couldn't drop that kind of money for this album. So when it was reissued just recently, I had to jump on it. And of course, that album is Cherry Pie by Warrant. And it's an album that, it's not my favorite Warrant album, but it's definitely up there. I think there's some great tracks on this album. It definitely made it worth owning on vinyl. I just couldn't drop a couple $100 on even, like I said, even that 2017 pressing, which even, the 2017 was really cool because it's on red vinyl. It kind of goes with the cover, but Yeah, I just couldn't spend that kind of money for this album. It is a fantastic album. This new music on vinyl pressing sounds absolutely fantastic. And these are all numbered. This I got number 1943. I actually did a giveaway on the channel, or I'm doing a giveaway on the channel. That contest ends January 6th, actually, but it's one I'm very happy to finally have on vinyl. I had an unofficial bootleg pressing of it, which sounded good enough to have, but this one definitely sounds better. And then the last album I got on the list, between this and Belladonna by Stevie Nicks, it's the main reason why I went off Record Store Day this year. This one hasn't been available on vinyl since 1999. It was actually really hard to find, even that 99 pressing on vinyl, and if you did, it was going to cost you a couple $100 for it. So when I saw it was on the RSD list this year, I was definitely thrilled to see it. That album, of course, is Whitey Ford Sings the Blues by Everlast. And, it's great to see that this album is very widely available now. You can pick up a copy even probably at your local record store today. But I think they did like 10 or 12,000 copies for a record store day. What It's Like was the big track on here. But this is such a bigger album and a better album than just that one track. But, same with a lot of these other releases. I have a really hard time spending more than $100 on a record. So even though I really love this album, I've loved this album for a very long time, I just couldn't drop that kind of money on it. But, it was definitely my number one reason to go off Record Store Day this year. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. So this is part 2 of my video for best reissues of 2022. If you haven't watched part 1 of it, make sure you go back and check that out. A lot of great stuff that came out this year, but drop me a comment down below. Let me know what some of your favorite albums, some of your favorite reissues of 2022 were. There was just so many of them. Like I said, I could have done even more than just 2 videos. I could have done 3 or 4 videos probably on all the great stuff that was reissued this year. But let me know what some of your favorites were. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me the old thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.